Hello, friends. This is Katie, and this is the Truth for Your 20s podcast. And today I'm like going back to the OG, how I started this podcast, and that is finding people I love on the internet, sending them a DM, sliding into those DMs and saying, "Hey, will you be my friend?" And sometimes they say yes. And that is today, Dr. Lisa Stanton. Actually, my husband sent me one of her reels and he was like, I feel like y'all should be friends. And immediately I was like, indeed. Love her. Love her. Quick intro on you, Lisa. I just got this from one of your reels. It was so interesting. So, in a nutshell, she has a PhD in psychology, went to years of therapy, meanwhile, got lost in new age solutions. But what actually healed her battle with alcoholism and anxiety was forgiveness and meeting a man named Jesus. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Lisa Stanton.
Thank you so much. And a great bio.
We're already like before we recorded, we're like, oh my gosh, we have so many things to say. You're just so interesting. I mean, obviously there's so much to unpack, but yeah, can you maybe just give me a little bit more of a high looking view of who you are and what you're up to?
Today I would say a place I never quite expected to be up to. But I feel like that's kind of appropriate for this like truth for your 20s, which is just stay on the path and the path will bring you wherever you need to be brought. So today I actually at this point just work for myself. I like to think of myself as a writer. I've recently been told, given how many Instagram followers I have, I'm also an influencer. I'm embracing whatever that means.
You do great reels.
I
And
think of myself as a writer first. I'm also an influencer. But yeah, so a writer mostly about faith and recovery. And my first book comes out December 10th of this year.
yes, and it was so funny as I'm doing a little deep dive of who this amazing person is on the other side of our screens. I'm like, oh my gosh, and she has a book coming out in December, 52 life-changing lessons I learned in recovery. I mean, that's going to be so exciting. So,
Yes.
yes, well,
I will
yeah.
say too, even if you're not in recovery, there's a few lessons that are like about alcoholism specifically, or about eating disorder specifically, because I struggle with those. But like I would say at least 40 of the 52 lessons are just faith-based lessons that I happen to learn because I found God in recovery, but that they apply to anyone.
I'm so excited. Okay, I want you to take me back. I know you mentioned that you were in a sorority and
Mhm.
almost get kicked out because of extracurricular activities that involve substances, obviously. But your sorority sisters kind of met you there. I don't know. I'm sure there's so much to unpack. Talk me about your younger self.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny actually if I funneled into just college specifically because I started drinking in high school, but I feel like it kind of I mean, it was already bad in high school. I was going to say it peaked in college, but maybe it didn't. It was already pretty bad in high school. But in college, so I went to college actually to run Division 1 track and cross country at University of Richmond. And then my leg broke, and through some other stuff that happened, I sort of quit track and then joined a sorority instead. Um, Kappa Alpha Theta at University of Richmond in whatever
Woo
that
woo.
was, 2009. Um, and then found there's a lot of partying that was in some sororities. There were some sororities there weren't. That one there was a lot of that. And I sort of found this home. Like it was not the sorority's fault that I was partying. It was just like a more accepted place that was happening. But what was so interesting is I think all of these other people were just sort of like drinking and forming sisterhood, and I was like blacking out all the time and taking it much further. Like once I stop, I look back and I'm like, I don't think anyone was even doing what I was doing. I just thought everyone was doing what I was doing. And that became much more obvious to me senior year of college is when it really started to spiral out. I think it was actually junior year, when I got put on sorority probation. So I was supposed to be on risk, which is not usually relevant to the audiences I'm talking to, but people will hopefully know what that is. So I was not supposed to be drinking 1 day a year, right? I'm not supposed to be drinking. And instead, I took like a bajillion shots and blacked out. And then Risk had to take care of me at the social. Um, I got like put in a cab home. I think I actually didn't go to the hospital that night, but then senior year, I'd gone to the hospital a couple of times from drinking. And then um, April, there was a big pig roast at University of Richmond, and I'd been drinking all day the day before. Some bad stuff had happened, and then I woke up the next morning, and some girls I was really close friends with said we were going to brunch, and we were not going to brunch. And instead, we parked in a Starbucks parking lot, and they were like, you have to do something about this. Like, this is crazy. And one of the girls' dads was in recovery. So they like whisked me off to a recovery meeting in rural Virginia. And that was my first exposure to recovery. I did not get sober that day, but it was the start.
You just said so many things I want to unpack. First of all, the in air quotes, everyone is doing it. You said you felt like everyone was at the level, if you will, of the blacking out drunk and stuff like that. But, retrospect or hindsight, they weren't. That's $1 million statement in itself, because especially when you're young, you feel like everyone is fill in the blank doing whatever. And really, first of all, everyone is such a relative term. It's usually like the 10 people that you can name, but if you really look, there's plenty of other people doing other activities. But I don't know. So I guess I just want to like put my thumb on that for a second. And then you also mentioned going to the hospital a couple times, not just once, for getting drunk. Was there ever like, to your own self, maybe this is a problem, maybe I need to, or is this maybe just looking around, oh, well, everyone's doing it?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was queen of denial of all problems at that time. And I think so. Just to go back first to that statement about I thought everyone was doing it, I think I surrounded myself with people who really were drinking quite a bit. Um, but nobody else was. I mean, if I look back at the things that were happening to me, if you're out there and you're listening and you're too embarrassed to admit this, like I was blacking out all the time. I was peeing my bed. I was peeing my boyfriend's bed. Like it was like things were wrong long before I was ever even going to the hospital. And like those are not normal, right? If you are doing any of those things and thinking that you're a social drinker, you're probably not a social drinker. And looking back, it's like my friends were for sure like pre-gaming a little bit, drinking a little bit when they were out, but they weren't having those consequences to their actions. They weren't waking up in places where they didn't know where they were. They just like were drinking in college.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I think that's those two things are really different. And then shoot, what was the second thing you asked me?
Oh,
Oh,
and then,
did I have an awakening of any
yeah.
kind so that this maybe is a problem? Um, it's interesting because I feel like I could talk myself out of anything. Like the hospital days, it's like, oh, well, maybe I was roofied, or you guys shouldn't have brought me to the hospital. I didn't really need to be in the hospital. You could have just put me to bed, right? So I'm blaming others. I'm not taking accountability. But it was really, I hurt some friends in the final stages. Like men were involved, men that my friends liked were involved. I was drunk. Like, I'm sure people can fill in the blanks. When I started hurting friends and not even knowing that like my friends had to tell me I did it, I didn't even know that I did it. That's, I feel like when I started, like, at least I knew that others were being harmed. And I didn't know that I wanted to admit I had a drinking problem, but I definitely knew that I didn't want to keep harming others in the way that I was harming them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So your friends meet you for quote brunch, but it's really an intervention.
Intervention.
Yeah. Did you go kicking and screaming? Did you like, okay, fine, whatever. I'll cross my arms and hear them out. Like, what was it like?
I was so embarrassed once they told me what happened, that I mostly remember just, like, crying in the car, and then I wanted to go really far away from campus. I don't know who I thought was gonna be there that was gonna see me, but we had to go really far away, and then the sad thing about what happens that day, although I think the important thing is that seeds were planted, but the sad thing that I tell people is, like, don't just try one meeting and then be like, "That's not me." Because that's what happened that day as I walked in, and we'd driven so far away that it was like middle-aged rural people. And I was like, this isn't me. I was bleach blonde then. I had big long eyelashes then. Like I was tan then. I mean, even now I probably would be like, those aren't my people. But even more then, I walked in and I was like, these are not my people. This is not who I am. And my friends kind of, I don't know to this day. I could ask them. I'm friends again with them now. Um, I don't know if they let me off the hook because they too believe that I wasn't like having an alcohol problem, or whether they let me off the hook because they just didn't know what else to say. You know what I mean? When I'm like, this isn't me, they just like didn't, how would you, I look back and I'm like, well, if they had said that wasn't them, what would I say? You know what I mean? So like they're trying to be as supportive as they can be, but they just don't really know where to go from there. But these were friends that over like the next, like the middle of my 20s, just to plant seeds for people who might like, if your story sounds like mine, like you're going to show up to your sorority sister's weddings in your mid 20s with one shoe on drunk, and they're going to talk to you again. Right. And now you're 25 and you're doing that. You're not 21 and you're doing that. Right. You're going to miss flights to your friends' weddings because you drank too much at the airport, or you drank too much at the boat party that you were at when you're supposed to go to the airport, and you're not going to make it to the welcome party. Right. Like those are all things that happen to me later, and then those conversations like resurfaced, obviously. And then it was actually when it was finally time to get sober, it was a sorority sister who I called. Her husband had gotten sober like 5 years prior, and he had talked to me at some of these like gatherings and weddings, because I had moved to Minnesota, far away from Virginia, where I went to college. So I mostly was seeing them at major events. But she was who I called, and I was like, "Hey, can you put your husband on the phone?" And he was like, "We've been waiting for this call." But that call was 7 years after the original intervention. So,
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to get things first. This power of sisterhood. I talk about this when I go to colleges. I think it's a beautiful thing. Your community matters. And you mentioned that you're still friends with a lot of these girls. Like, I'm curious, I'm sure you have had conversations about what it was like for them on the other side of, hey, we're going to tell her we're going to brunch, we're really going to do this intervention, and how it, you know, they saw someone that they wanted to help, but that's messy and complicated. And yeah, I'm
mhm.
curious what they said to you and how what that looked like as this the beauty of sisterhood and the good about it. Although, like you said, it was 7 years after you finally. What did that look like? What are those conversations like?
Yeah. So I only really know stuff from part of my recovery process was going back and making amends to them. So I want to say they stood by me as long as they could, but those friendships like were severed and
Yeah,
ruined. And
yeah.
like they were, by the time that I made that call in 2020, I graduated college in 2013. Between 2013 and 2020, even from halfway across the country, I've ruined most of them in pretty dramatic fashion. So like people who care, like they really cared about me and they really tried to hang on. But if you show up to enough big events and weddings and other people's important events that way, eventually people are just like, I love you, but I can't, I don't know what to do.
Right.
um I feel like the one consistent thing was like them being like, I love you, but I don't want to see you doing this to yourself, and I don't know what else to do. And so like those conversations happened. They were pretty vocal. I chose partners who drank a lot and who like helped me get into a lot of trouble. They were pretty vocal all along, like, hey, I don't know if this is the right partner for you. Hey, I don't think that this person. So like when I look back, like they were trying the hardest that they could to be like, you can get out of this. Like, please let us help you. But what's been so cool is to see over the past 3.5 years, as soon as I showed up, I mean, don't get me wrong, in the beginning, because I'd said like, I'm going to quit and then I wouldn't before, um, people are pretty touchy at first, but as the time went on and as the like healing went on, they were kind of like, oh, this is for real now. And then when I went back, and the difference between, I'll say too, I know we haven't really brought God into this yet, but the difference between an amend when I'm just like, I'm so sorry I did that to you, and an amend where I'm like, I now can see from this perspective. Like I had an awakening and I see how selfish I was and how wrong I was and how I was not thinking about you from like anything other than my own self-centered perspective. And like, I understand forgiveness. Like when you come in that way, people are like, whoa, something here has happened. That's not just this like, I'm so sorry that like I'm so sorry that I severed this relationship, which is sort of what had happened before. But I wasn't really grasping how wrong I was, I don't think, until my relationship with God started.
Yes, and I want to talk about that too. What I hear though, just in you talking about, they take me to the hospital and I'm saying, blaming, right? Like, oh, well, you should have just taken me home. It's not really my fault. I wasn't really that drunk. Not looking everywhere except in the mirror versus, having these conversations now. And I severed that relationship. I was wrong. And I feel like that is gigantic with anything in life.
Mhm.
Even if you're 5% wrong and the other person's 95%, taking ownership for that 5%, that little concept, I wish my 20-year-old brain would have gotten it in a lot of areas, but obviously, especially in what you're walking through here, incredible. I just like, and obviously, I'm sure Jesus is the one who helped you. Like, here's a mirror, my sweetie. Let's
Mhm.
start here. Let's start here. Okay, what did that
Can
look
I
like?
say one
Yes,
thing
bring
about
it.
that too that's even, I think, bigger than that, that I have learned is that, like, when I think about, like, when I was going back and making those amends, I prayed until, like, prayed, because there were times where I'm like, "Well, they did this to me and I did this to them," and whatever. I prayed until I forgave the other person to the point where when I showed up, all that I could see was my 100%.
Wow, that's
If that
great.
makes sense. So, like, I didn't ever come into, like, a phone call with someone that I'd harmed, where they harmed me too, being like, "This is a call about my 5%." Like, not even in my head did I have that. It was just like, "This is a call about my 100." They have a 100 that they can deal with themselves, that they can choose to make amends to me or not about, but, like, I didn't come in with any, like, "This is my part, this is your part." It was just like, "This is my part."
Yes, yes, and that's huge because you're right. If we divvy it up, then it doesn't even matter, anyways. I'm
Yeah.
gonna say, I'm sorry. Now I'm waiting for you. What's the point? That's
Yeah.
on them. That's huge. All right, so you graduated, still, kind of in this reckless lifestyle. Did you pursue psychology? Talk to me about those years after graduation and all the things in between.
Yeah. So in college, I was always that double life, which is pretty classic of like an addict alcoholic of, so my college GPA is like 3.9. When I was in this, like I was scholarship chair, I won every scholarship award, like highest GPA in my pledge class. So like people would literally, my nickname in college was Blackout Lisa. They're like, how does Blackout Lisa have all A's? So
Wow.
like it was always that I was doing work and I was good at homework, or like I'm good at homework, I'm good at taking tests, or I'm blacked out. That was like the two modes. So I went straight from undergrad to a PhD program at University of Minnesota in social psychology. And I think I was really just pursuing my own, like I wanted to understand people and health. So it was in social psychology, but my area of research was health behavior change. So I wanted to study that because I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And I didn't want to go as far as like clinical psychopathology because that felt like a little too close. I was like, well, that feels too close. And I don't need all that. I just need like a little behavior change and I'll be fine was kind of
Nothing's
what I
wrong
was
here.
thinking. Yeah, no, don't even worry about it. So I kind of you're not supposed to do this, but I was like I was interested in the research, but I was also interested in trying to like kind of resolve what was going on with me inside. But I felt like the more that I understood about behavior and research, I kind of felt almost like more lost rather than less lost. Like I was understanding more, but I felt like the more I understood, the more I was like, this is really a black box that we don't really know that much about. And I was mostly studying like eating behavior and exercise behavior. But even within eating behavior, there's those very similar, like addictive patterns of the people doing the worst are like, they don't want to eat and then they binge eat. And I'm like, okay, let me look. Why are those people doing that? Because that's what I do. That's what I do. So what is that? And then they're like, oh, well, we're not really sure. And none of our interventions really work for them.
Wow.
So it was kind of this like dead end. But what's weird is while I was in grad school doing that, and at the time, I don't know what it's ranked now, but at the time, University of Minnesota was ranked like fifth in the country for a PhD in psychology. So it's like there's not a better place to go to try to figure out what I'm trying to figure out. Um, I was feeling more lost, like personally, professionally, trying to figure out what was going on. So I start pursuing like that's where the new age stuff came in, um, sort of through my own doing, sort of through the guy I was dating at the time. But I got really into yoga. I became like a 200-hour certified yoga teacher. I'm like, the stretches are going to resolve all the problems. That's my chakras aren't aligned. I don't know. That's what it's going to be.
That's all you need. Just your chakras
That's
aligned.
all I need. Align my chakras, all will be well. Um, so obviously that didn't work, but then I kind of went like deeper down that path. Like, okay, there's more other kinds of yoga and kundalini, and then that brought me into kind of like astrology and all of this other. And then I started dating a guy who owned a few cannabis companies in West Sonoma, which is like super hippie California. So then that's how I got involved in sort of the even like wilder new age stuff was all because I was spending a bunch of time in hippie country. And people think of Sonoma, they're like wine country, but East Sonoma is wine country. West Sonoma is like hippie weed country.
Okay, so you're walking around barefoot with I'm like picturing the dreads and the
Yeah. Like that's when like LSD and mushrooms and like cacao ceremonies, whatever I can get my hands on, I'm willing to try.
and do you feel obviously this isn't helping anything, but and maybe you don't know the answer to this, but nothing's better, right? But maybe was it worse? Did you feel like okay, nothing to see here? You're still very functioning. You're probably still doing well in classes. You're maybe have a job at
Yeah.
this point. You're checking all the boxes. Was anyone like any interventions? Was anyone worried? Was anyone? Are you just kind of going through the motions?
Yeah, I mean anyone who I ever like dated and best friends were always very concerned about me, and they eventually sort of would like back away and be like, "Hey, I don't know what's happening here." So my roommates at that time, I lived with the same girls actually from who were both in sororities at their own colleges. And then we were all in grad school, but in different programs. I lived with the same girls for the first few years of grad school. And they right away were kind of like, whoa, like what's going on here? And I like opened up to them and was like, I've had problems with this in the past. I thought it would be better in Minnesota. I don't know why. We all think it'll be better if we just move elsewhere.
Yeah,
You take yourself with you and it doesn't get better.
exactly.
Um, so yeah, so anyone who was really close to me was always pretty concerned. Interestingly, my family didn't really know that much because when I left, I grew up in Pennsylvania and then I moved to Virginia for college and then I was in Minnesota. And there were some signs when I was home for breaks, but when I've talked to my mom since then, she was sort of like, you were seeing all your friends that you hadn't seen for a long time. And it's always like over a holiday where people would normally drink more. And so my family really didn't like see that much of it or think that much of it. But over time, like I even would have like my boyfriend's mom who I dated in college and then for like a few years after on and off, she eventually called my mom to say that she thought there was a problem and my mom was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I just had too many things going that
You
there
were
wasn't
moving.
any solid interventions after that, but any boyfriend or close friend had done sort of some mini version of like something's wrong here.
And you also have the classic pretty exterior, if you will, the A's and the showing up for work. And, there wasn't any just drinking well, you weren't drinking yourself into crazy situations, but not, you were still doing checking all the boxes, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, I was showing up like exactly the amount that I needed to, not always sober, but always showing
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was hard to sort of track. I've even talked to like your mentor in graduate school. You're entering class in a PhD program is like four people. So your mentor is almost like a parent in some ways, like you're just around them all the time. And they really didn't even know, which is shocking because I thought when I went back and was like, "Hey, this is what was going on," they would be like, "I was wondering," and they like weren't even really wondering.
Wow. Wow. So you were in California at the time, or what was finally the breaking point when everything changed for you?
Yeah, so I finished graduate school in 2019. Honestly, things in some ways too. I had found always trying to use men to save me. I'd found a boyfriend who had given me a drinking ultimatum in early summer of 2019, and I had to finish my dissertation. And I stopped drinking for 44 days that summer. Everything else was still going wrong. I was still abusing Adderall, but I didn't drink for 44 days and finished my dissertation. And that's basically why I finished graduate school. And then I had already, in my regular fashion, secured a postdoctoral fellowship that was funded by the National Institutes of Health at the Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine in downtown Chicago. So I was in the Department of Preventive Medicine working on behavioral research for secondary cancer prevention. So breast cancer patients who were in recovery to try to help them, like not in recovery of alcohol, like not
Yeah.
in remission, I guess
Remission.
I would say, to try to help them with their like eating, exercise, stress behavior. So once again, like now I'm a postdoc at Northwestern School of Medicine. Everything's fine. And about 4 months into that postdoc, I started it. So I moved to Chicago and started it September of 2019. And then COVID is that March. And things were starting to spin out of control in Chicago because I just didn't have like, I lived by myself for the first time. I didn't really have no roommates watching me, no support system. It was spiraling. And then COVID happened and my job went remote and I was box fine 24 hours a day. Like it was just over. I was like walking to a Trader Joe's buying more. Like I saw once I didn't need to seek. It's like what you were saying about that, like achievement and approval. Like all the studies pretty much stopped. There was nothing to achieve or prove anymore. And I saw that as soon as that was gone, I'm I'm out of control. So it was like literally just basically nonstop. That sort of March, April, I was like, I can't be in Chicago anymore. So I had driven back to Minneapolis, but to stay with the cannabis ex boyfriend. So it's not like I was making great decisions yet. But what was so interesting about that is after a couple of weeks of staying with him, he like looked at me one day and was like, your drinking was always bad, but I've never seen it this bad. Like, you can't just be here doing this like that. You have to do something about this. So I went on like a 5-day bender out on the lakes here. Everyone drinks on boats on the lakes here. And then that Monday was when I called my sorority sister in Connecticut and said, I think I finally am ready. So
Wow, wow. And so her husband, who was also in recovery, kind of helped you take those first steps?
yeah, I don't know if I would say he helped. It was a very classic recovery thing, but he gets on the phone and I was like, I think I'm finally done. I don't know what to do. Like, it's been 7 years and nothing's better. And he was like, yeah, go to a meeting. And I was like, I went to one, I didn't like it. And he was like, two things, Lise. One, it's COVID. They're online. All you have to do is log in. Like, you don't even have to go to a place. You don't even have to walk out of a place. You just have to go. And if you really hate it, you can log out. And he's like, other than that, I don't have any suggestions. So you best get on a meeting. It's like,
Good.
okay. And that was kind of like, he wasn't more supportive than that, but I've learned that that's kind of like, that's how I treat the next person today too, because it has to come from the inside. And I think if he held my hand, I would have started to be like too dependent on him instead of on like, I needed to like stand on my own 2 feet, find a sponsor, figure out what was going on. So,
So you take that first online step to recovery, and mm, where did Jesus come into play? You met him and he changed a
yeah.
lot of things.
Yeah, so that's actually the best question because my first 7 months, so my first meeting was like that first week of June of 2020. And I basically stopped drinking like within about a month of that, which is a pretty classic. Like you say you're done, but then like July 4th, I drank again, but just like a little bit, not a lot. So it was unraveling. But what was so interesting is from those first, so until basically Christmas Day. So from June to Christmas Day, I barely drank and things didn't really get better. And I was like, this is not what I was promised. So like I quit drinking. I'm going to meetings like 3, 4 times a week. I'm making friends with people who are in recovery instead of my drinking friends. I'm not going to bars for the most part anymore. Like I started doing those things and things were getting worse. And it was kind of for my whole 20s. I had eating disorders in high school. And that's part of why I never liked quitting drinking because they would come back. So it's like, okay, now I'm not drinking and now I'm restricting again, or now I'm bulimic again, or now I'm whatever's happening. And my anxiety would get worse, right? And so the experience of someone who has a problem with alcohol quitting alcohol turns out is not that fun. Like regular people, I feel like it's cool on Instagram now to like stop drinking. And if you don't have a problem, you will feel better if you stop. It'll be great. If you have a problem, it might be worse, which is the experience that I had. So by December of 2020, 2020, I'm having like at least one panic attack a day because my anxiety had gotten so bad. I was binging and purging like 3, 4 times a day. So just like lost in bulimia. And there's like, I can't even remember what else was going on, but I'm not getting anything done. I'm like barely a human. And basically at this point, I was like, why am I even sober? Like it was almost better to just be drinking, but that was also horrible. And the recovery kind of caused this the jumping off point, which is the point where I am finally willing to do anything because I can't take life sober. And I know that life doesn't work when I drink. So, like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Um, and that was when finally someone kind of said to me, like, you haven't been doing the God part. And I'm like, I don't do the God part. I'm smart. People who are dumb do the God thing. Like I've been educated, I have a PhD. I understand that like rural America believes in God. That was literally my perspective, but like I don't. The rural and South believe in God. I am from the Northeast. I am educated. I am not a God person. And they were like, okay, well, die believing in alcoholism then. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. And something like that, it started Christmas Day. And basically that week from Christmas into my sobriety date is January 4th, 2021. So from those like 11 days basically after Christmas, it kind of like brewed and brewed. And then that same person that had said that, I was like, fine, I'm ready to try. Like, show me what I need to do. And we drove to a church, which is, I was like, I said I was okay, but now we're in front of a church. This is a lot all on day one. And we park outside of a church. And he was like, we're going to go in there and you're going to turn your life over to God. And I was like, can I do it in the car? Like, I need to go in there. And it was just a lot, especially like I was willing to surrender to God. And I sort of knew that that meant Jesus, but I wasn't like, I was trying to like still like weasel my way around that. And we ended up going in and it turned out it was a Catholic church. So it wasn't just a cross, it was like the cross with Jesus on it that was hanging above the thing, like a full crucifix with a crucified Jesus on it, which is, it's just more than even just like non-Catholic churches have the cross, but not the main
Yeah.
thing on it. So now I'm like underneath the man. And I was like, fine, whatever this is. And I didn't even know, which is so cool. I didn't know that day that that was going to be my sobriety date. I didn't know right for months because I used to relapse all the time. I didn't know for months looking back that that was going to be my sobriety date. But that day, I turned my will and my life over to God sitting there. And then that day, I mean, now for 3.5 years has been my sobriety date. And that was the beginning of me understanding grace, understanding forgiveness, understand like I remember after I like this experience and then I started praying for forgiveness for things and experience the experience of grace. And I remember then hearing the song Amazing Grace and I like looked at my friend and I was like, is this why people like this song so much? Is this what this is about? I just thought it was a pretty song. I didn't know they were like talking about the thing. So
That's so cool.
yeah. So it's been a cool journey. But that was all to say like my recovery was not a recovery. It was basically like a continuing of the fall until the God part because it turns out I wasn't lacking not having alcohol in my life. I was needing God in my life.
Yeah. I it's so interesting too. This is legit, kind of classic looking for love in all the wrong places for and in boys and booze and achieving, making the A's, having the PhD. You were like queen of don't worry guys. Like I can do life on my own. I have it all figured out. I am educated, I'm smart, I am cute. I can hang with the best of them, party all night long and also make A's. So good luck to the rest of you figuring it out. Take notes from me.
Yeah.
I mean, while God's like, well, let me know how that works out. And
Yeah.
when you can't do it all and come to your wits end, I'll be here for you. And wow, wow, wow. What a great story.
Yeah. I love that looking for love in all the wrong places too, because it's the alcohol, it's obviously like the drugs, the men, but like to really understand for me that like that the A's were the same problem, right? That the PhD was the same problem. That like those weren't, it wasn't like, oh, I was like doing alcohol and drugs over here and that was bad, but I was doing school and that was good. That to see like all of those were the search for meaning. That all of those were actually the problem in their own way was actually like this weird thing to be like, oh, all of those are the seeking outside instead of seeking God. And I just didn't even realize that. Like that, it sounds funny. And like, sure, there are ways in which I learned things over the 6 years that I was in school after college that I can now see how God's using those tools in my writing today and stuff. But that, like, those were all like buying a Chanel bag to fit in was actually like the exact same thing as getting a PhD, was the exact same thing as drinking, was the exact same thing as the boyfriends, that those were all the same.
I'm glad you said that. That was something that God changed in my life that like I don't really even talk about that much, but it was like a surprising something I didn't see coming. Like I used to just go to the mall by myself like just to waste time to spend money. I don't know. It was just like part of what I thought you did in life. And it just became so unattractive and unappealing. And like, yes, I still need clothes and yes, I still go to the mall, but it's no longer just because. I don't know. It's just
Mhm.
so interesting the things he changes because you're right. Like that might be more accepted by society to make the A's and have the Chanel bag or whatever. But why? Like, is it? And not that these things are bad. Yes, make the A's and buy a bag if you want to. But I don't know. It's so
Mhm.
interesting the things he changes. So interesting.
Yeah, I will say one thing in that category because I've reflected a lot on shopping because I have this thing where I'm like, I'm gonna keep doing it, like in some ways, but what does that look like? And when I think back to what I was doing before, I was like shopping while imagining how I'm gonna feel better and different if people know that I have this thing. And that's a lot different than like the thing is, I'm not trying to I'm like I should use a different brand. We're not anti any brand here, but whatever it is, bags are just easy. But like let's use Gucci instead since I have more Gucci than Chanel. So I'm this is a personal story now. But like when I if I'm going and I'm like this is everyone's going to like me better. This is how I'm going to fit in. This is how I'm going to feel better. I saw this girl and I want to be just like her. And that's what this is. Like, that's, I feel like when I'm getting into the space of like striving and idolatry and whatever. Whereas if I'm just like, you know what, I think this orange Gucci bag would be really fun to have. And like, and then I'll see what comes from there. Like maybe some girl comes up to tell me she likes the bag and God uses that as a way to connect me with people. So it's not a lesson in buy the bag, don't buy the bag. It's a lesson in like can't my whole like lesson over the last 3.5 years has just been can I honestly observe myself and see what's going on inside? And if I'm being honest with myself, is this just a fun way to like spend the gifts that God has given me in terms of money? Great, do it. If this is a striving to fill a hole, I better just go pray first and then see if I still want the bag afterward.
I love this so much. Okay, so classic quintessential overachieving in the best ways and the worst ways. You know, like I'm making the A's and also getting the most drunk. Good job. Um, what and then this complete 180. I mean, I'm sure. Was it a clean cut? Was it a simple like a clean break, if you will? Was there relapses? What does that look like? I mean, I'm sure there's people listening that are, oh my gosh, I can relate to her story. What did that look like for you?
Yeah. So after January 4th, it was a pretty clean break. But I think of that in the way that we were just talking about, that it wasn't clean before. This is actually some of the lessons that are in the book and stuff I talk a lot about if I'm trying to quit, I'm actually in this state of renouncing, which attaches me deeper to it. Like if I'm trying to quit the boy, if I'm trying to quit the drinking, if I'm trying to quit shopping, that like the quitting itself is actually an attachment. And what I need is just to get closer to God and then let those things fall away. And that's really what happened over the course of that beginning. So I can't remember exactly, but basically over the next like few days from January 4th, I was still taking anxiety medication. I was still taking ADHD medication, all of which was at these levels of like, I don't know if people know amounts, but like I was on like 70 something milligrams of ADHD medication. Nobody needs to be, no one of my size, you can't see what size I am, but I'm a pretty small person. Nobody needs to be on that much at my size. I don't even know if anyone needs to be on that much at any size. But so I like knew that I had been pushing those things to the limit. And it was like a slowly moving away from like, maybe I just don't even need to be on these at all anymore. Like slow, but like a with God thing. And so pretty quickly, like I was just done. And it wasn't as though there weren't times over, especially those next few weeks, where I had a problem come up and I was like, I really want to drink. I really want to drink. Like the obsession comes back. And it's like all you can think about is like, drinking will make me feel better. That's all I want to do right now. This will go away. I'll fix it again tomorrow. Like all those thoughts come in. But I had a mentor in sobriety who's like, in that moment, you have to make the choice. If you're going to drink in that moment, you're making the choice. I'd rather drink than pray. That's all. Um, and it's not if you're making the choice of like, do I have enough willpower? You're going to drink 100% of the time. Like 100% of the time, you lose. Yeah, I lost 100% of the time in that, whether it's one day or 1 week later. If it's a willpower battle, like I eventually lose. So the question is, can I in that moment go to God and be like, what is it that's underneath there? And the more practiced I've gotten at that, the better. And then that's where like alcohol doesn't even come to mind anymore as a solution. Even when things are really hard, even when I'm anxious, even when something's going on, the thing that like comes up is like, what can I do with God to help me deal with this to get rid of it? Which is why I talk so much about forgiveness. Like, where am I wrong? Right. Which we circles all the way back to the beginning. If I'm in a state of anxiety, like I'm wrong about something and I need to figure out what it is. So, a good example from this morning, this I talk about this on Instagram some, but my husband's in a pretty nasty custody battle. And we were working on some stuff this morning. And I try to stay pretty neutral, but his ex-wife has like gone to the level of even like lying to the police to get orders for protection and tried to get orders of protection violations that the police have to throw out. So it's like it's very messy. So even when I'm trying to be neutral, I end up getting worked up. And then I got in the car and I'm driving down the highway and I'm like anxious. So it's like that would be a time 5 years ago where it's like, I'm just going to drink because then I won't be mad at her and I'll feel better. Right. And it's like, first of all, the gift of that doesn't even come to mind. What comes to mind as I'm driving down the highway is like, I have to forgive Meg again, like this again, fine. And then I start like prayers just that I like and have about like, God, please help me forgive Meg. Please forgive my anger toward Meg. Please forgive any judgment that I have toward Meg, right? Because if I'm in that anxiety, it's usually like I'm in resentment toward her. I'm in judgment of her. And to see those things where it's like, that's what's so cool when I say like my 100% is even where like I literally haven't even done anything wrong here, right? My husband probably has done some. There's two takes two to tango in a divorce and a messy custody battle, but like I definitely didn't do anything in this one. But to see that my 100% is like God asks us not to judge, right? God asks us not to hold grudges and resentment. So if I'm getting into this place where I'm judging and I'm holding a grudge, I'm actually in the wrong.
Yeah. Wow, gosh, that's so and the maturity that from a girl in the hospital who's like, "You guys don't need to take me to the hospital. I'm just fine. Take me to the couch and give me some water. I'll be fine." To the maturity of now forgiving someone who you legit did not have a wrong in. That's like 50 years of wisdom in however many short years that was.
Yeah. So that was a really long answer to your question. But essentially, so after January 4th, there's been no relapses. But I say that, and then because then people are like, oh, it's just been this like uphill journey of nothing. And it's like, no, it's just been this learning, like situation by situation, that if I can turn to God, if I can see where I'm wrong, if I'm willing to, if I'm being honest with myself about where I'm wrong in every situation, taking that to God, taking uncertainty to God for wisdom. Like if I can do that 100% of the time, I never need to drink again. I never need to use a man to soothe again. I don't need to use my PhD anymore, which I don't. Right? Then it's all going to be okay. And I don't even need to show up like wishing for perfection. That is so ironic that I said the word wrong. Like I just need to show up with God and it will turn out the way that it's supposed to.
This is so cool. I was writing down notes and like things I want to talk to you about, and I feel like you would give so much wisdom to this idea, if you will. And that is so I know someone who kind of in your situation before recovery and was healed and then not and relapsed and then not, kind of this back and forth and stuff. And they're in the situation now, it's like I am just going to do drugs until the money or my body runs out. Like they have just complete like all the best efforts of people who love this person or like they're just completely given up. And I was talking about this with a friend, and no one would say when they're a teenager or 20 something or anyone like, I want to be an addict. I want to push everyone away. I want to tell my children this is the story that dad died of OD or whatever. Like no one plans that, but no one plans not to, or no one plans
Mhm.
the steps to get away from that. Whether that's your family history of alcoholism, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a family history, but I guess what I'm saying is you didn't, when your younger self did be like, oh, I want to get blackout drunk all the time. That sounds so fun. I want to be dependent on men or drugs or whatever. I mean, I guess, how do you prevent that? How do you make steps not to be that person? And maybe talking to your younger self, what would that look like?
Yeah. So what's interesting, well, I'm gonna start by saying I have no idea. These are just my thoughts,
I like
right?
it. I like it.
Um, so, but the thing that the I guess the evidence that I have is how I sort of like unwove everything that happened, right? So if it's like if if the healed person, so it basically what I'm saying is that if I could have understood the things that I know now and I could have applied them, I'm going to say beginning at 7 because I really think that's when things started to unravel. If someone taught me all of these things at 7, and I understand some of them are a little mature for a 7-year-old, but like if they'd been part of what I was learning when I was 7, when I was 14, when I was 18, I think that drinking wouldn't have felt the way that it did because I wouldn't have had all of this anger and anxiety balled up. And then maybe I wouldn't have become an addict, because essentially what I think of addiction is like there is a spiritual malady that is basically I'm full of anger, I'm full of fear, I'm full of uncertainty, I'm confused about why I exist, I don't understand why I'm on this planet, existential crisis to the extreme that's just sort of like happening all the time. And it usually is the cause of like that happens because some traumatic, could be capital T, like something terrible happened, could be like minor, right? I came in and I was like, nothing really happened. And then people are like, well, what about your parents' divorce? What about your friend that got murdered in fifth grade? What about, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess those things like brought me to this state. Like, what about all the kids that your parents tried to adopt and these new kids that got introduced into your life? And what about the boyfriend who dumped you when you were 14 and the boyfriend who cheated on you then? And I'm like, oh, wow, I guess I am actually angry at a lot more people than I realized. But I didn't have like, I grew up in an upper middle class family. I went to college prep private school, right? I went to a private college on a division one. Like, there was no like, I grew up in this place and all of these terrible things were happening around me, which some people that is their story. But if you're listening and you're like, I don't have trauma, I'm like, it doesn't have to be like this huge thing. But like, if I, at 7 years old, if someone had been like, hey, I think that you might be taking your parents' divorce like on, that you're really angry at them and you feel like you can't admit that you're angry at them. And if you can admit that you're angry at them, but like Jesus forgives you, like, because that's, it may sound like really silly, but that's the work that I did at 30 years old to be like, oh my gosh, I actually was so mad that they got divorced that I turned that into like, love doesn't, I didn't even want to get married. I was like, I don't want to get married. I don't have kids. Everyone just gets divorced. And that was all the result of anger toward my parents. So it's going back and looking at if I had the tools to anyone who I ever perceived to harm me, if I knew that step one is go to God to help me forgive them. If I like had that tool in my toolbox, that like my step one is I forgive people because otherwise I'm drinking the poison, that would have changed a ton of stuff. And then if I had that thing of like, look for how I'm wrong because that's the thing that's harming me. And like really take accountability for things. I feel like that would have been so helpful because I thought that things were resolved when I blamed somebody else. When I could figure out how to blame somebody other than me, I thought they were resolved. And that was actually just making everything spiritually worse the whole time. So that when I got into recovery, I had to be like, I have to unravel every lie that I've ever told myself and figure out how it was actually me so that I can actually like bring those true confessions to God and then it's over. But if I can't admit the truth, I can't bring them there. It would have been way easier if I did it while I was growing up because then I wouldn't have had to at 30 try to go back and remember everything that happened.
Yeah, and those
But
seven-year-old problems, and they were legit problems, but like they're easier to deal with at that age. They're not as
yeah,
tangled with all the other things, and maybe easier to understand even. So yeah,
yeah. But it's really simple in the end. It's just like, I mean, it's they always say simple but not easy, right? It's forgive everybody all the time and get forgiveness for your anger and bring your fear to God. That's like really all that I do today, just
yeah.
times every situation that I've ever interacted with.
Wow, wow. And you're doing amazing things on the internet and just like breathing fresh life into. You really are doing a great job on the reels. I love them, by the way.
Thank you.
And in the book, I mean, it's just, our mess becomes our message is one of my favorite quotes. And truly that's your story. And you're speaking up about it. A lot of people walk through a lot of stuff and then brush it under the rug and pretend like they have had their life together all, the whole time. And what a shame it would be to not share the junk that you walk through and pretend like you are this have it all together. So thank you for going back
Yeah.
into the mess and showing, your way and sharing the vulnerability. Yeah, because and like you said, your mom didn't really even know, your parents didn't really even know all the junk that you walk through, and so you could have just been like, "Yep, I was perfect all the time. Moving on." But
Yeah.
you're like, "No,
It's
here we go."
hard. Yeah, I was gonna say, well, what's been so interesting is you do kind of get to this point where there's this little part of you that's like, well, now I could just go to parties and say I don't drink and pretend I never did. And then everyone would be like, wow, she's so put together. And so there's like a pivot point when you're really well, where you're like, do I do that or do I help people? Probably I should help people. That's probably what God's calling me to. God's probably not calling me to pretend I'm perfect.
Probably, but you know.
Probably not. But it's been so cool to see like how many people relate to the story, even if it's not like if you didn't take it all the way to the hospital, right? To just like start to look at like, hey, maybe I am more angry than I realized, or maybe I am more fearful than I realized. And maybe there are these ways, or maybe I do blame others and I didn't realize that there was healing in taking accountability for things. And just in these little ways that there are ways to take things from this, even if you don't identify with, throwing your life away.
Yes. But now you have like such a beautiful story of redemption and all the things that you're doing now. And so now you are currently working for yourself, you said? What does life look like
Yeah.
today?
I'm like, I don't really make an income yet. So that's been my husband is very supportive of the journey and hopefully
Yet.
going. So yeah, I'm always like, I work for myself. I haven't figured out what it's kind of fun. I'm in a fun place of figuring out what does it look like if I like wanna do more stuff like online. I'm starting to make a course to try to help people walk through the stuff that we just talked about,
It's
so
great.
that'll be something. The book will be something. My husband and I both trust God that it will be figured out, whatever it is. So yeah, my life looks like that. A lot of writing, a lot of working with the publisher and just figuring out exactly like who we want to market the book to at this point. Kind of like I was saying, I was like, it was originally for people in recovery, but so many of the lessons are so much more broadly applicable
Yeah.
than that. So yeah, it's been fun. I just celebrated my 1 year wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, so we're doing that. We're trying to start a family
Woo
on
woo.
God's timing, not our timing. So
That's awesome. And it is a blessing that like, your husband's able to support and you're able to, you don't have to work a 9 to 5 and take away from all the other things that you're doing in the writing. And, maybe this for such a time as this, that all of this mess and where you are now can focus on being able to share the mess that you walk through to be a message. So I think that's awesome.
yeah,
I
yeah,
love
it's
it.
been really fun.
Yeah.
So
Well, thank you for sharing it today on this podcast, and we'll make sure we link your book to pre-order and social media and all that good stuff.
beautiful. Thanks. This was
Yay.
so fun.
It was so fun. Thank you, Lisa.